Hi, this movie demonstrates the ELSeWeb system, a semantic-based system that automatically and seamlessly pipes data hosted into the LifeMapper modeling system. The first thing we need to do to get the ball rolling with this experiment is to go ahead and log into LifeMapper. Here is the page upon successful login, which I've already done. We're doing this because ultimately ELSeWeb will return to us a URL to a model result, and this will save us from having to log in at that time. The second step is to choose an experiment which we'd like to run on LifeMapper. This particular page has 4 experiments, 4.1 through 4.3. They're all basically the same except for the kind of data that is being piped from EDAC into LifeMapper. Let's look at 4.1 for instance, which is titled Modus data. We see that the particular algorithm we'd like to employ over at LifeMapper is the bioclem. We'd like to model using bioclem an occurrence species with an ID of 4024107. Now the data that we would like to use from EDAC to serve as our environmental scenario layers, which will kind of drive the modeling over at LifeMapper, is any data that's been sourced from the Modus sensor. Now this is a very relaxed requirement, essentially just one constraint. However, we can append additional constraints to this using logical AND. For instance, we could request that, well, I would like to build a scenario layer set composed of any data sourced from Modus and data that is contained within this particular spatial region or possibly this temporal duration. But for the sake of this demo, we'll be using just data that is sourced from Modus. Now this particular experiment description, I manually listed and I extracted this information from an ontology that I created. This ontology is located under this URL by location. So I've already opened this URL and we can go and take a look at this ontology. So what you'll be presented with a lot of RDF. What's really important to notice is this particular section that I've highlighted right here. This states that any data that is deemed eligible for ingestion for LifeMapper for this particular experiment should have a property has source with the value of Modus. So any other data that does not have this particular statement appended on it will not be considered. Any data that has additional properties may be considered, so long as it satisfies this one constraint. So going back to our demo procedure, we then need to locate and copy an initiation query. The queries, as you could see, are also on the experiment description. So let's go back up to 4.1 and we see an initiation query here. Here's the link. I've already opened this particular query. These queries serve as a kind of triggering mechanism to pipeline, to start that data flowing from EDAC into LifeMapper with those various constraints that we presented earlier. So what this particular query is saying is we'd like to run a LifeMapper experiment located in this OWL file, experiment 1, which was the RDF that we were previously looking at. From this OWL, we ultimately like to run a LifeMapper model, and we are requesting the URL for the final model output. Notice how we're not specifying anything about what particular services at EDAC to retrieve the data from, or any intermediate transformations this data may possibly intermediate transformations this data may need to undergo. We're simply specifying the source and the target. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow machines to figure out first what services at EDAC to invoke and any intermediate services to massage the data for into LifeMapper. So we'll go ahead and copy this query. Go back to our description page. Here we see that step number 4 is to paste this query into the CardioShare instance. Now CardioShare is actually this semantic system that is going to use the ontologies from our experiments and the ontologies describing our services, EDAC, LifeMapper, and any intermediate transformation services, to automatically orchestrate a pipeline that will take our data from EDAC over to LifeMapper. So we can go to this CardioShare demo, and I've already ran an example. I'll delete it. I'll refresh the page. Let me go ahead and paste this experiment in here. Click Submit. And you can see that it's ingesting our experiment ontology, so it now understands the criteria for our data. It's going to invoke intermediate service it needs to massage the data from EDAC until it gets to LifeMapper. And then ultimately it's going to invoke LifeMapper, which will take a few minutes. So this will allow me to speak a little bit about why it needs to invoke some intermediate services. The data at EDAC is the OGC WC data. This particular data is wrapped with some metadata. LifeMapper does not know how to handle this particular format. So ELSeWeb, the ELSeWeb knowledge base actually has knowledge about the data requirements at ELSeWeb, and it sees that the data properties from EDAC match the data requirements at ELSeWeb. So it found a service to mitigate this disparity. So the particular intermediate service will get the data from EDAC, extract the TIFF codes that LifeMapper knows how to process. Note that the user nowhere in the experiment ontology nor in the query has to specify this intermediate step. This was inferred through the reasoning system, which is really the back end of the cardio share system. And it's still calling LifeMapper. They must have a lot of traffic because it's taking a little longer than usual. But that's okay. I guess I can speak a little bit about the query. The query actually isn't like a custom query language. It's actually a Sparkle query, a semantic web standard. And here we provided with the results. I went ahead on the particular query and I requested that it select a few of the properties of the experiment for sanity's sake. For instance, here in our algorithm, it was biochem was ran. It composed a layer set, and here's a URI to that particular layer set. And I could follow that link actually from this view results as RDF, and we could actually look at that layer set, but it would be in RDF, and it's a little bit outside the scope of this demo to explain that RDF. Here we have the occurrence set modeled 4024107, and the units of our scenario set, which we knew ahead of time, which is decimal degrees. So we can go ahead and we can click this link, and it will take us to a LifeMapper result page. So our model that we're requesting is actually being generated right now, and it takes a little while to generate these models, which is why you see that the status of this is initialized. Actually, it'll go through kind of a life cycle, say initialize, started, and ultimately completed, upon which time we'll be presented with the species distribution of that occurrence set, and it'll be overlaid nicely on a Google Earth-like map. Thank you very much.